When did this whole thing called corporate governance come about?
Corporate governance is actually an old concept, Jeremy, although we haven't known it by that name for a long time.
Okay.
The name originated only in the 80s. But corporate governance actually existed in the concept thereof, in the substance thereof, for as long as companies has existed. The reason being that corporate governance are the controls that are put in place to manage the risk that shareholders face due to the fact that they forfeit control over the capital that they invest and that they leave the capital in the hands of the managers of the company. And then the purpose of the board then is to oversee management in order to make sure that shareholders' funds are protected and applied towards the purposes of the company. So we talk about the agency risk. Now, corporate governance has over the past years moved significantly and evolved significantly from merely being the management of the agency risk. We're saying that corporate governance is no more about form and structure and policies. It's much more now about behavior, about ethical philosophies, about how the company makes its money. And it's also gone beyond looking merely after the interest of shareholders, but rather adopting a stakeholder inclusive approach.
Jeepers, I'm glad I didn't ask you a difficult question. Man. Okay, so basically it's been around since people started putting their money in the hands of other people and saying, I will invest in your company, but I want a return on that investment.
Exactly.
We're going to get to how it's evolved and where it is today going forward. But you're talking about now moving into philosophy and ethics and all the rest of it. Was it when it first sort of started and became established? Let's take it from the 80s on, when this thing was given a name, corporate governance. Was that more just checking controls and that sort of thing? Was it more a technical aspect?
Yes, if we take, for example, the South African experience, and we start with the King report that was issued in the early 90s, which was around about the time that all of these international governance codes were started to be issued. We see that the emphasis is very much on structures, on the independence of the board, because the idea behind it being that unless the board is independent of management, it can't oversee management properly. There's very much an emphasis on audit committees being a layer between the company and the board, and the audit committee being focused on financial reporting, because investors rely on financial reporting in order to make financial investment decisions. So that's where we're coming from in those early years.
Now just hang on there, because there's something I don't understand here. This audit committee, where do they sit in the structure? Are they independent of the management?
Yes, audit committees are normally board committees.
Okay.
In those early codes, and that continues to this day, very much an emphasis on the independence of the members of the audit committee. It's a committee of the board.
Okay.
So, and the reason why there's a committee is so that it can give dedicated and focused attention to financial reporting, because investors are so reliant on what is disclosed in the financial reporting so that they can make investment decisions.
So the audit committee then would be a bunch of the directors who obviously know something about auditing, who then drill down into the books of the company and ask the questions that investors would need to have answers to. Am I right there, or am I talking absolute rubbish here? You must, if I talk rubbish, then you must just tell me. Ansie, I'm a big boy.
I won't hesitate.
Okay, right.
No, you're on the right track. The members of the audit committee are typically financial experts. they would look after the appointment of the auditor to make sure that the auditor of the company is independent, make sure that there is credibility and that the financial statements are credible and that they can be relied on. And then there are international standards like the international financial standards, which companies have to comply with within their financial reporting. The audit committee will make sure that all of those standards are being applied in the financial reporting. In other words, when a shareholder then looks at the financial reports, the shareholder knows that there was an audit committee with experts sitting on that audit committee, making sure that the information is reliable.
Okay. Right, now I understand that. The philosophical side of this whole thing that you're saying is starting to come in. Let's go forward before we go back. I want to come to the King Commission, the King thing, okay? But this whole philosophical, ethical thing, where does this come from now?
Corporate governance codes, certainly in the EU and the Commonwealth countries, have taken the non-mandatory approach. In other words, it's not legislated, it's a voluntary code of principles. If we talk about legislation, we're talking about rules. And with rules, you either comply or you do not. Yes, it's a yes or a no answer. There are various ways that one can achieve the objectives of a principle, and those principles are contained in these codes. Now the reason why I'm answering your question in a roundabout way is to explain to you that we in South Africa and many, like I said, the European Union, we do not want to follow a rules-based approach because it neglects to take cognizance of these philosophical matters and concerns that feeds into sound corporate governance.
What philosophical things are part of corporate governance?
Corporate citizenship. What corporate citizenship means is that companies don't operate in isolation. Businesses operate in a certain context, within a natural environment, within a community.
Okay.
Now, the traditional approach has been that businesses are good for society because of the trickle-down effect. Businesses don't have to do anything other but conduct business, and that is already good for society because business provides employment, business provides a vehicle for investment, and businesses pay their taxes, and hence businesses are good for society.
Okay. I see where you're going now.
Now, the trickle-down passive approach is simply not working in our modern society where the world and businesses and society and the environment are connected in intricate ways that we're only starting to understand now. If we take, for instance, the BP example, if BP were to follow the trickle-down effect, they wouldn't have to take any responsibility for the damage that was caused to the natural environment surrounding the Gulf of Mexico. But we're saying businesses can't be so passive about that anymore. Okay. Yes.
So it takes into account corporate social responsibility, sustainability issues, environmental issues, community issues, all of those things that we're sort of just becoming used to at this stage.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift from the way we used to do business. You know, in the 80s, the Thatcher and Reagan administrations actively supported maxims like greed is good. Anything in the name for profit. Again, coming down to the starting point that businesses are good for society, so accept the collateral damage that it causes. The public view has shifted. Public's just not, and society is just not accepting that anymore. And so unless one understands those principles within this context, you wouldn't be able to achieve the objectives of corporate governance principles as set out in codes.
But as you say, this is not legislated or anything. This is accepted by the vast majority, I would imagine, of companies in places like the EU. What is the acceptance rate in South Africa like of this new philosophical approach to doing business?
In terms of lip service, the acceptance is very good. JSE listed companies, in terms of the JSE listings requirements, those companies need to apply King 3, our corporate governance code, or explain why they do not apply it. Okay. So there they almost don't have a choice, at least to think about it. I think in South Africa we face the challenge that there's the perception that corporate governance is for listed companies only. The smaller companies feel that we're too small for it, whereas at the IOD we're saying if you're a smaller company, corporate governance needs to be applied differently, but you still need to be aware of corporate governance issues. You cannot start out as an SME, grow into a small private company, and then eventually when you list, only start considering corporate governance issues. Same with state-owned entities. It will be applied, corporate governance will be applied differently in state-owned entities, but it needs to be applied.
Okay, now then we need to go to a break, but I wanted to take a look at those three issues. SMEs and how they should be applying corporate governance. You've explained the listed companies, but once a company starts getting bigger and starts thinking of listing, what they should be doing, and the state businesses, how they need to differentiate from the private individuals. Can we take a look at those three in just a moment, if you don't mind? Lekker. Ansie Ramalho, Chief Executive at the Institute of Directors in South Africa, is our guest this evening. We'll be back in just a moment.